Our next speaker is Tom Barefoot. Tom is the founder of Gross National Happiness USA and has been working with Gross National Happiness USA Vermont as a lab project to develop best practices for implementing alternative indicators for state and local governments, for nonprofits, and citizens. Tom has been working to develop gross national happiness ideas and how to frame them and keep them above partisan gridlock. He shares with us what his Vermont-based organization has been doing to advance the UN Declaration.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here today. It's kind of like uniting the two coasts that have a lot in common. We've had a lot of exciting things happen, and a lot of them have just sort of come along the way of the universe where suddenly something happens. We had an experience this winter when one of our progressive state senators who had talked to us and had listened to us about gross national happiness and these ideas of alternative indicators let us know, oh, by the way, I've introduced a bill into the Vermont legislature for the Genuine Progress Indicator. And all of a sudden, what that meant was we had to jump into this and support that and educate people about that and talk to the media about that and find allied organizations to join in. Well, what happened was we did all that. And a lot of interest came up. I was talking in the legislature with the various senators and representatives, and at first it was kind of like, this is silly, what is this? And the people more to the right on the spectrum were saying, happy meter? You're kidding us. Well, as we talked to people, and as people saw things like the UN standing up and having 68 countries co-sponsor that resolution from tiny Bhutan to suggest that all countries should adopt and experiment with well-being and happiness measures for development. And as they saw other organizations jumping on, the Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility and the Vermont Public Interest Research Group and the Vermont Natural Resources Council and the Vermont Workers Center and a pretty broad spectrum of other organizations were telling these people, this is actually sane stuff. You should look at this. And so as the wave rolled forward, and we tried desperately to stay up on the surfboard through this period, we got more and more support, and lo and behold, it passed the legislature. And in May, the governor signed the bill into law, which is enabling a genuine progress indicator plus other human rights measures for the state of Vermont. And the governor signed that, and so it's now the law of our state. And by the 15th of January, we will have a genuine progress indicator delivered to the governor and to the legislature. And this, of course, opens up a whole bunch of things. So, all right, what is this all about? And I'm taking a step back and saying, well, what is this gross national happiness stuff? And what I think is most important about it is that it's sort of a family of ideas. It's not just these four, but there are a bunch of ideas that keep bubbling up that we need to think about. We need to look at the values that are behind them, and we need to learn how to talk about them, and we need to learn some stories about them. And as you can see, all of these things are open-ended sorts of questions. There's a lot in there. Okay, so this UN thing came along as the wave was coming through. Last summer in July, there was a conference in Bhutan where many of the thinkers in happiness and in sustainability, Bob Costanza was there and many others, to figure out what can we do. Bhutan deserves some real credit for sort of standing up in the face of the insanity in our world and saying, wait a minute, we got problems, we need to fix them, or we're all going down with the ship here. And so they very bravely have stood up and have said, okay, if the big governments of the world aren't going to try to figure out how we're going to solve our problems and move into a happy and desirable future, then let's just get together the well-meaning, brilliant people of the planet and we'll solve it. And so that from that meeting came an April 2nd meeting in New York with 650 people. A bunch of Nobel Prize winners were there, and a lot of good, bright people from around the world. And the first day was devoted to really working with the UN, and the second 2 days were in the context of, okay, of these 650 people, whomever of you wish to stay and start some working groups to really work on this, let's do it. There was an immediate term goal. The Rio +20 was 10 weeks away from that April 2nd meeting, and they wanted to have some kind of an expression there, even though it would be the, you know, sort of the last row saying, hey, wait a minute, I got an idea. And so a lot of hard work went into that, and there are groups meeting now on a bi-weekly basis of telephone calls and working groups, and starting doing some real work. So as I abstract the two things that I learned from the UN effort is to form a new paradigm, it really had two parts to it. One is we need to develop better national accounts. And that's what Bob Costanza was talking to, is we need things that measure the things that need to be subtracted from the consumption numbers and the things that need to be added to it. Go ahead, next slide. And as Bob did, we also point to Maryland's efforts with the Genuine Progress Indicator. Very good to look at. Look at the things they have on their website. Wealth versus well-being. How do we measure prosperity? The governor of Maryland was very into getting into these alternative indicators and doing something with it. So there's a real push in Maryland to educate the public. Go ahead to the next slide. And these are the three sets of things that are being measured in this: economic indicators, environmental indicators, and social indicators. And you can see what's in there. On the economic, it's really that consumption, but it's also taking income inequality and some of the other things that need to be adjusted, and adjusting those. We have the environmental costs at long last showing up. So this is really fixing a broken set of accounts that allowed people to take the top off a mountain and disregard the future costs of repairing all that, leaving it to the future generations rather than putting that into the actual costs. And we have social indicators there. And again, the cost of family changes and things like that. And a great example of a divorce. It's 2 houses, it's 2 refrigerators, it's 2 cars, the GDP goes up. So GDP would be saying that that's a good thing. We really need to help people to understand that this kind of measure is leading us towards more and more and more growth, and that's already taking us off the cliff. So we need to change that, and we need to change it to what we want. If what we measure is what we get, and the guy that said that was Joseph Stiglitz, Nobel Prize winning economist, then we'd better know what it is that we want to get and set up measures for that. And then that gives us feedback in the complex system of the world, and by setting up those feedback mechanisms, we will actually create change. And we talked about this earlier, and you couldn't see it on Bob Costanza's slide, but you see the USA way in the upper corner there, where upper is worse in terms of the index of health and social problems. and it's correlated with income inequality. Again, this is something that really needs to be looked at. There's a great book called The Spirit Level and an accompanying website that is well worth a good look by people. Next slide, please. Okay, so the other half of the UN's economic paradigm, one was better national accounts. The second one is to use well-being and happiness indicators to measure development. And that's partially tied to the UN Millennium Development Goals, or will expire in another year or so. And the idea is to change the measures, to start adapting well-being measures to all of these development projects that we do around the world. So there's sort of a 2-year timeline to try to have these ideas developed and worked on. So next slide. Okay, these are the 9 domains of happiness in the G&H model, and we've so far seen about 70 models of well-being and happiness measures. And my own take is that it's a time of great flux and development and evolution as we start to learn how best to use these indicators and which indicators are good for what and how we're actually going to apply it. That's Vermont using the Happiness Initiative's first set of surveys, and you'll see Seattle data there, and a little bit of test data from Vermont that we did a year ago. And using these numbers over time, you can sort of see whether you're going anywhere or not. Next slide, please. And this is a different set of happiness measures from the Gallup Healthways data. And you can see 2010 and 2011, and you can see things moving around a fair amount there. Go ahead to the next one. So what we've done is developed a construct which says, okay, GPI, that fixed the chart, the national accounts, plus G&H, those well-being indicators, equals GPI plus. And together, those two really make for a holistic set of change measures. And one of the things that we're doing, again, that wave provided us with a rather remarkable confluence, and we ended up getting a $20,000 grant from the Vermont Communities Foundation to develop a grand collaboration around data in Vermont. The Benchmarks for a Better Vermont group had a large grant from the federal government to teach nonprofit organizations to use results-based accountability, which is an outcome-based method of assessing whether you're doing anything. Traditionally, state agencies and nonprofits have reported back, well, we had 340 hours of contact with our clients, and that's what they did. Did the people change at all? Do we know that? Could we know that? Don't we want to know that? So this business of outcome-based budgeting, of results-based accountability, is coming through from the Benchmarks for a Better Vermont, and Common Good Vermont is an organization that supports nonprofits. The Gund Institute for Ecological Economics, which Bob Costanza was formerly the director of before moving to Portland, is one of the world leaders in ecological and environmental economics and in developing these kinds of costing for ecological services and social services and so forth. So we've got a partnership of those 4 organizations that are going to start implementing G&H well-being measures with the nonprofits and with the state agencies like the Agency of Human Services and the Vermont Health Department to measure their outcomes and see if we're really changing the curve on the well-being and the happiness of the citizens of Vermont. So that's coming together just at the time with this UN work that's coming together, just at the time as the state of Vermont has adopted a Genuine Progress Indicator. And the governor, before we even started with the Genuine Progress Indicator, had his team at work on building a dashboard. Now, we know what the dashboard on our car looks like, and today the information we get from GDP is like having only a speedometer. There's no gas gauge and nothing else that might be useful. We only know how to make it go faster. So now we're looking at how do we get a complete dashboard? How do we get something that really tells people what's going on? You know, remember the banks used to always have a sign outside that told you the temperature, and then it would flash and it would tell you the time? Those are two things you can't change very much. What if it told you what the kilowatt hour usage was yesterday? Well, you'd be able to say, I'm going home and I'm going to have the kids turn off all those extra lights and see if we can't bump that number down a little bit for tomorrow. By having feedback, you can make the change. Next slide, please. And that's the result-based accountability. And what we're seeing is we're trying to take population statistics from the well-being data, which tells us what the needs are and whether we're making some progress, and take the program data, the results of these programs trying to make things better, and see if we can't link that up somehow. Go ahead. Change the slide, please. Okay, so what will spread G&H ideas? And I think this is something that we can take some time with. Conferences we've had 2 of them so far. Very good response from all over the country in Vermont. Next year we're going to have a Chautauqua, which if any of you are familiar with the New York State place where people come for a week at a time or so and they get immersed in programs. Well, they're going to do a happiness week next year, and G&H USA is helping them find speakers and do programs around that. And we may also have a Chautauqua in Vermont, and we've talked about having one out here, cooperation with the Happiness Initiative folks. So these ideas are starting to bubble up about how we can make these change. And I appreciated Connie's thoughts on the personal aspects of this, because I often think that when we really get down to this, it's really about changing our values and figuring out how it is that we want to live in the future. Imagining a future and then asking ourselves, what is it like to live in that future that I desire, that I want, that we want? And when we do that, and when we start to develop that empathy for other people, the size of our family expands. You know, how big is your family? Is it your little nuclear family that lives in a particular house at a particular address? Does it include some friends? Does it include some extended family? Does it include some people from work? You know, is it your county? Is it your state? Is it your country? Is it your planet? How big is your family? And as we expand that family, and as we start to do things for each other, you know, homo economicus is the technical term for the kind of people that the big banks would like us to be. That is to say, driven by our self-interest. That the idea is that if everybody goes out and does what's best for them, somehow everything will work out better. That will manage distribution for us. Well, when I looked at that and understood that a little better, I said to myself, well, that means there's just one person looking out for me. Oh, that's one option. Well, what if we all looked after each other? Then I might have dozens or hundreds of people looking after me. Which case, am I actually better off? So we need to change some of our values and some of our things like that as well. What we've tried to do is to understand these fundamental G&H ideas, and I offer to all of us as a challenge is to start discussing those and think about those. Because in addition to understanding them, we need to frame them, we need to have really good language for them. And more important than either of those is actually having really good stories to tell that illustrate how these things work and why it is that someone should take this in and shift their values and on how they live and how they're going to live in a future that makes sense like that. Thank you.
Thank you.